Hi, everyone, and welcome to Chazey Partners RPA episode 2. As you can see behind me, my Phoenix Suns are now in the on the NBA championship. They won the conference finals last night. Before we did this episode, we agreed to wear our favorite sports shirt. So I am sporting the Phoenix Suns, and Chuy forgot to bring his shirt. But joining me today is Chuy Michel, our global head of RPA at Chazey Partners. Chuy, would you like to say a few words?
Sure, Jim, and congratulations on the Phoenix Suns. And
yeah, thank you.
I miss my Chivas shirt. I promise. Episode number 3. Stay tuned. I'll bring my jersey.
Okay, you bring your jersey, and I'll bring my beloved Kansas City Chiefs jersey, and that's what we'll do the next one on. So anyway, without further ado, thanks for joining us, everybody. We are Chazey Partners. Today's session, we're going to talk about process discovery for RPA. Before we actually kind of get started, again, this is supposed to be kind of a relaxed conversation. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. We enjoy making these. So I'm going to turn it over to Chuy just to kind of give you a breakdown of our RPA process, and then we'll get into the process discovery piece. Chuy, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. And you remember episode number 1 was all about pilot versus proof of concept, right?
That's right. Yep.
We spent 12 minutes talking about differences, advantages and disadvantages. And we plan to do the same thing today, talking about process discovery, process suitability assessment. First thing to keep in mind, Jim, right? It's always about process, right? 50%, 60% of your RPA projects is all about process. It's all about looking at it from an end-to-end implementation perspective, where you have your process suitability assessment, you have your business case, your strategy, you go through proof of concepts, you go through pilots. Then once your program is up and running and you really want to scale it, don't forget about centers of excellence, critical for growing your program. Agile methodologies for bot development, structured methodologies for bot development. And last but not least, looking at this from an end-to-end perspective, managed services, maintenance and support, extremely important to keep in mind. So that's the way we at Chazey look at end-to-end RPA implementation. But as we said, today we're going to focus on process discovery, process suitability. So let me ask you a question, Jem. What do you think are the top 3 and most critical aspects to keep in mind when going through process suitability or process discovery?
Well, from my experience, Chuy, you have to have the right people, right, doing the assessment. And let me give you an example. We've recently had a client who had key individuals involved in the assessment piece, right? The problem is that those key individuals didn't know exactly what every department was doing that made up this process. So it was very difficult to get how many people actually performed the task, how often it was performed, and even the what we call the SMEs, or they weren't really process owners, although we like to have that, but they were really the technical leads. Even though they knew a process inside and out, they didn't necessarily know across the organization. So I think one of the key things to getting a good assessment is making sure that you have the right people in place. Now, generally speaking, we talk about process owners and subject matter experts. Sometimes they don't have a global view. So if you're talking about a global company that might do accounts payable, for example, in different regions of the country, then you really need to have someone that understands across the board every piece of that process and really knows the number of people that are performing that task. Because as you know, economic value, right? Not just what you're going, the idea behind RPA is to take some of that mundane work out of people's lives, right? I've got a client right now that they get about 2,100 PDF documents every month, and every month they have to go and they grab it and they move it into HR system one at a time and entered into employee records. If you can automate something like that, that's a significant economic impact. It's not about replacing people. It's about getting digital workers to work along beside humans and let humans do more value-added work. So back to the discovery piece, I really think having the right people, right? And then of course you have to be able to identify the right processes, right? And so how do you do that? Every company may have a different method for that, but as you know, we use an interview process, right? And we're looking for key information. How many people performing? How often is it performed? Are there clear rules? And I don't know. Sometimes it's difficult to understand the concept of clear rules. How would you describe clear rules, Chuy?
Yeah, I think that it comes back to procedures, right? Processes and procedures. And you mentioned something very important, right? Having the right people on board with the project. The guy that really performs the task, it's the best person to answer the most critical questions. So whether the rules of what to do in each and every step of the process are clear, sometimes it comes back to documentation, right? It comes down to documentation. Do you have a level 5 already in place? And would that level 5 describe what are the rules? And if they don't describe it, what's the exception process? So only when, right, going through this interview process that you mentioned, Jim, is when you figure out if really there's clear rules or there's ambiguity in how things are managed at the transactional level. And you don't see that in a piece of paper. You really see that when you have the process discussion with the subject matter expert. And I almost think, Jim, back to the point of having the right people, which I mentioned as well, right? It's having the right people, subject matter experts, but also spending enough time to provide training about what RPA is and what RPA is not. If you don't convey a clear message upfront since the beginning to the team that is going to participate in the project, and they clearly understand what RPA is going to do for them and what RPA is not, then you may be entering a second phase of a project with high odds for failure.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. It's very critical. The assessment and it's the interview. It's whether it's a Zoom meeting or in person, it doesn't matter. It's really spending the time with the people that know the process. Now, I will also, to counteract that, sometimes the people that are performing the process are so close to the process that when you go through even the assessment, you don't hear about all the exceptions, right? Because they know, well, you don't enter a value of a 1 in that field, or that field is alphanumeric, so you would never enter a character or something. The point is that they're so close and they do it manually, right? Every day they're hitting the buttons. And so it only through time. And in fact, I've had it, and part of what we provide is a scoring model, right? And we give people a roadmap of their automations. And I've recently had it where we go through the assessment, and sometimes you can spend 30 to 45 minutes per process answering these questions, and you think you've got it all done, but then we go and we put it in our scoring model, and we go back and we say, okay, here's what we heard, right? Here's what we entered. And then at that point they change. I'm like, oh, well, no, that really, that takes a lot longer than 5 minutes. It might be 10 minutes or 15. And well, we probably have closer to 6,000 transactions a month versus, the 4,000. So even at that point, you can run into discrepancies from what you heard in the assessment. But I think the key, again, is asking the right questions, clear rules. Is the data structured, right? What kind of inputs and outputs from a process? trying to think here.
And I was
the exception rate, right? How much is the exception rate? Because that factors into your economic value for a particular process. I'm sorry, you're going to say something?
I was just going to add to what you said, right? So the first thing is, as you go through the assessment, it is important to keep in mind important elements. And you mentioned them: clear rules, frequency, the structure of the data, the number of exceptions. Do you need this process to be executed daily, monthly, weekly? Even many times we find, Jem, that when we go through process suitability or process discovery exercises, there are things that are being done weekly, because that's the only time that is available for the teams to execute certain tasks. And when you introduce to them the idea that a bot could do that on a daily basis, you can see the reaction in the audience, right? So when you enter these exercises, it's not about how things are done today. When you go to process suitability, you end up figuring out opportunities for simplification and optimization about the way things are done in the as-is scenario. I was going to ask you, Jim, because we've been talking about elements, structured data, getting the team together, getting the training. It would sound to me like a very long project, 3-4 months worth of a project, or how in your experience, and what's the typical timeline for a project like this where you go and discover the best opportunities for automation?
Well, a lot of it, I'm going to say probably a couple of weeks, depending on how many processes, right? So for a typical, just an assessment, right? Assessment and roadmap, anywhere from 3 to 5 processes, right? I'm going to say about 10 days. And here's why: because a lot of the time you spend your time up front, day 1, day 2 of educating a client and brainstorming, right, ideas. And you want to be able to do that on days 1 and 2, so that you get a good list of 3 to 5 processes. We try to do 5 processes that they believe fit the rules of RPA, right? All the rules that we've talked about: clear rules, structured data, repetitive, manual effort. And then on day 3, we can actually go through the questionnaire. Now, availability of people's time is key. So if you dedicate your SMEs, your process owners, for a few days up front, then all the work comes to Chazey, right? We do the heavy lifting. We take the assessment forms, we knock all that out, put it into our scoring model, right? And then on day 10, we have a nice roadmap prioritized that tells you exactly, based on the numbers, right? Now, that doesn't mean that's the way you implement it, but based on the numbers, economic value, the stakeholder satisfaction, the qualitative data, then you can make an informed decision as to which process you want to automate first, second, and third, and which ones make the sense for your business. It's one thing to look at a piece of paper and say, oh yeah, this is the way it's prioritized. But just because something has a high economic value doesn't necessarily mean that that's the one you do first, because there may be others that may not have this high economic value, but are a real pain point for your organization. And they could be lower hanging fruit that allow you to implement those automations sooner, right? And you kind of gain some momentum that way with your RPA program.
And that outcome, Jim, right? It's a very powerful tool to really sit in front of the CFO or the decision maker, present the roadmap, and present a business case. So the outcome of a proper process discovery and process suitability assessment is a business case. Let's not forget what is the end goal. The end goal is to have a roadmap. The end goal is have a clear list of priorities, but with the financials associated with it, right? So you can describe to your finance team, you can describe to your decision makers what's going to be the return on investment, what is the payback for the project. So it's not only about the process work and identifying the right priorities, agreeing the priorities, but coming down with money, right? How much is going to cost you to do it? how long it's going to cost you to do it, and what are the economic benefits associated with the roadmap.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. The one thing I want to leave everyone with an idea is we've talked a lot about processes, right, and end to end, but sometimes pieces of a project, right, can be automated. And so when we start to think about automation and what it provides for you, sometimes a lengthy process can be broken down into smaller pieces, right? Maybe you have a bot that does the download and the compilation of data, and then you have another bot that actually reads the file and uploads it into another system. Just an example. So we talk about end-to-end processes, but in reality, many times without modifications, many times it's pieces of projects, right, that are or processes rather, that are automated, that and eventually you may get to a point where it's end to end. Would you agree to that?
I totally agree. And I guess last comment that I would make to that, Jem, is the fact that, you know, as we always say, right, we say in episode number 1, and I want to say it again, episode number 2, probably in the 3 and 4, we're going to hear the same thing. Not all good ideas and candidates for automation become successful bots in production. So process durability, process discovery, the right methodology to get it done becomes extremely important and a critical success factor.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. All right, so that wraps us for this episode. We hope you enjoy watching, and stay tuned for episode 3 coming in August, maybe. Thanks, everybody.
Stay tuned for my jersey as well.
Hey, that's right. Bye-bye.